Hello and welcome to our third episode of Disappeared, the Abyss. Tonight we are discussing the third episode of Disappeared, A Fateful Meeting. I'm your host, Jacob, here with Alina. Alina, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hi, everyone. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to be back and discussing a very interesting case out of Maine. This is the case of Amy St Laurent, and she disappeared on Saturday, October 20th of 2001. Amy was 25 years old at the time of her disappearance. We have to go back a ways to understand this case. A few weeks earlier, before her disappearance, on September 29th, Amy was on a trip to Fort Myers, Florida. And her sister said that she was anxious to go on this trip, but she knew a man there whose wife had recently passed away, and apparently she had a crush on this guy, so she's going down to visit him. Now, Amy, you have to understand, was newly single after splitting up with her longtime boyfriend. They were supposed to potentially get married. Her mother thought that this would be happening, somewhat of a serious relationship, so when that ended, that signaled kind of a big change. Detectives in her case would later say they think that Amy was in a state of spreading her wings and trying some new things. So she wanted to see if there was potential for a relationship with her friend from high school, and that's where this story would go. In Florida, though, she would meet Eric Rubright, who was 27 at the time. He was a good friend and actually a neighbor of her friend Jason, who she was actually there to visit. And they, according to her sister, ended up having a good time. He took her on motorcycle rides, and they developed a friendship. Now, after that nice visit to Florida, Amy would return home. Now, Amy worked full-time since attending high school. She didn't go to college or anything. She worked at a company that was an aerospace manufacturer, and she really fit in there. Amy and Eric would stay in touch via email after her trip to Florida. He even sent her flowers at one point, which was kind of an indication that he might have wanted more than just friendship. But, Amy, again, just having broken up, was not really looking for a relationship at that point. But Eric would ask Amy if he could come to visit her in Maine. And despite her reservations about this, she agreed to let Eric come visit and stay with her in Maine. So already, Alina, we have kind of an interesting dynamic between this Eric and Amy. You can tell that they get along, they have a good time, but Eric appears to be looking for more. Do you think that Amy was aware of this? Would you get that vibe?
It's kind of hard to say, but as a woman, I think if someone sends you flowers and gives you all this attention, I would kind of assume there's some sort of interest that goes beyond friendship. So it's just kind of hard to say what her interests were in him, really. But having him come visit anyways, like maybe she just really wanted to keep establishing that friendship they had built. It's hard to say, really. Like, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think like you said, I don't know, it's a big investment to go on a trip from Florida to Maine. I mean, they aren't exactly close together. It's
True.
not just something you do spur of the moment. And if someone is sending you flowers and probably making it pretty obvious that they are somewhat interested in you. I know, some people just don't have that sense of telling when someone is flirting with them. So, I mean, it's totally possible that maybe she was not aware of this, but I think most people would probably have some sort of feeling that someone is interested in them.
I agree. So when Eric comes to visit, they go for a day of sightseeing in Portland, and they drive around, and they go to a part of Portland that's called the Old Port. And Amy at some point calls her mother, but this is in the evening, from his rental car and asks her to join them for a drink. Her mother, however, she's already in her pajamas and tells Amy that she's not going to come. And she later recalls that Amy sounded very chipper and she had a good time. At least that's, again, what she sounded like. And she tells her that she loves her. So since Amy's mom isn't going to make it for the night. Eric and Amy went to a sports bar and played pool, and a couple of young men joined them. Amy is the one who suggests the game of pool, and Eric describes the two men as pool sharks, very good at pool and good with the ladies and Amy. So at this point, when I watched the episode, I kind of was like, well, is this already a red flag? Did she feel uncomfortable being alone with Eric? Yeah, just like inviting her mom on a date, is that something you'd usually do? I mean, maybe she doesn't see this as a date, all those questions popped to my head. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was my first thought. I was like, if this was any type of date, there's no way you're inviting your mom to come get drinks with you and the guy that you're on a date with. For me, I think that's definitely a sign that either, again, she's just like not really understanding that this guy might want more, and she's just like, yeah, I'm gonna invite my mom out and we can hang out and have a good time, or she is getting the sense that Eric is interested in her and she really wants to send a signal that like that what's happening is not what he thinks is happening. Like, she's gonna call her mom and see if she wants to join them for a drink. What do you think?
I'm kind of thinking that, yeah, she might just want to signal that to him, because I think as a mom, she probably could tell that she was actually in a good mood. Like, she sounded chipper, and I just think if something was up, she probably would have heard that in her voice. So I think you're right with like, yeah, she maybe just wanted to signal this to Eric. And maybe, yeah, would have liked her mom to actually come out and all, but it doesn't sound like she felt uncomfortable at this point or anything like that. Well, what I also thought at this point was that we often in cases we hear that the suspect sets up a narrative or like points the finger at other people that may be suspicious. So just the wording, like the two men they hung out with at the bar were pool sharks or were good with the ladies. Like, the way this is described to me just sounds like, well, you're already trying to put the blame on someone else. So in my mind at this point, watching the episode, I was like, okay, Eric's kind of starting to seem suspicious in some way. He also stayed off to the side and watched. So I just kind of thought, like, you're interested in this girl. When you want to try to learn it, have fun. Are you watching them, like, this jealousy building up? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that there was probably some jealousy building, but as far as, did I think that that would lead to something happening to Amy? I wasn't able to make that leap while watching. I just thought, all of us have been out to a bar with like a pool table, you meet people and you talk to them and hang out with them. And I think it's pretty natural to maybe have some jealousy build if there's some feelings there. But to me, that's just not a situation that's all that uncommon. And I wouldn't think that it would potentially lead to anything nefarious. I think, he was probably having a good time, a little irritated that maybe Amy wasn't paying as much attention to him as he would have liked. But it didn't strike me as particularly suspicious.
Yeah. It's not super suspicious yet, just something that came to my mind at this point. We know that after they leave the bar, Eric and Amy head to the pavilion at around 11:45 p.m. And this is a popular local dance club, and Eric is not a dancer. They got a few drinks, and Amy wanted to dance, so she saw the guys from the bar and danced with them on and off a couple of times. So again, thoughts here. Why are they kind of just doing stuff Eric doesn't seem to like? Is this just like a coincidence? It could be nothing, but just doesn't sound like he's having the best of night.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't sound like a very like two-way experience, especially for someone who came all the way
Yeah.
from Florida to visit you and like kind of made an effort. It seems like they really are only doing things that Amy likes to do. And this is where I get the vibe that Eric's just kind of like a nice guy dude. I guess that's part of like why I'm not super suspicious of him at this point. Like it seems like he's like just letting her kind of have a good night because he's there for her, I guess. And, you know, he's willing to let her make the decisions. And also, you know, he doesn't know the area, so maybe he is just trusting her and she's saying like these are the good places and this is like what we should be doing, and maybe he's just along for the ride and happy to go off of her schedule.
Yeah, I kind of feel a little sorry for him, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I put myself in his shoes, I guess I'd be sad at this point. We also know that Eric noticed that Amy and one of the guys they met playing pool seemed to hit it off, and during last call, which was between 12:45 a.m. and 1 a.m., Eric went to the men's room, and there apparently was a long line, and when he came back out, Amy and the two men were just gone from what he told us. At this point, I know this is just my thoughts as I watched the episode. I was like, well, do these guys even exist? Because you just described how you imagine him being this nice guy who just tagged along, and she kind of got to decide what they wanted to do that night. In my mind, I just saw him like, well, this night isn't going at all as he planned, and he's getting more and more angry. And I was like, got even to the point, like, do these other men even exist? You know, so far we only have him saying that they exist, you know? So
Yeah.
another maybe silly question that popped in my mind was like, well, is there ever a long line at the men's room? I wouldn't know. But yeah, maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah, I think if you're investigators right now, it's tough because you're just working off of his account of things right now. And a lot of his accounts, like you said, aren't able to be corroborated. You know, if you're in a busy bar or club or whatever, and there's like a lot of people there, you say you're in line, no one's going to be able to like really prove
Unless
or
you
not prove
talk
that,
to
especially
someone.
because he's not like a regular there. He
That's
doesn't
true.
live there. People don't recognize him. You know, it's probably easily forgettable. So you definitely are in a challenging spot right now if you're the police who he's telling this story to. And you can tell that police are at least suspicious of him. At this point, he's the last person to have seen Amy before she disappears, and the police will definitely be looking at him very closely. Now, Eric will claim that, you know, after he was in this long line at the men's room, he comes back out and he can't find Amy. He claims he looked outside and inside of the club. He even walks around the entire block to see where she might have gone, but he couldn't find her. And that's when he claims that he started to become concerned. He went to his rental car, eventually not being able to find Amy anywhere, and left to go back to Portland, to her, or from Portland, that is, back to her apartment, which is about 40 miles south of Portland. He finds that no one is home. He says this is around 2 o'clock in the morning. He has Amy's purse and her backpack and her cell phone in his car. So he knows that she doesn't have a bunch of the things that she would need, her personal items. Eric would tell police that he wasn't really comfortable even being in her apartment when he goes back there. So he decides to spend the night in his car, which, Alina, I know you think this is a little suspicious and weird. I think it is a little odd as well. You know, I also looked up, just out of curiosity, what the weather would be at this time in Maine.
What would it
It'd
be?
be about 44 degrees. So, which I know doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but it's not like...
I know what that means.
Yeah, you roughly know what that means. And it's cold. It's not the worst. It's definitely not below freezing or anything like that. But it does seem like it would be uncomfortable. Probably if you've ever camped out when it's gets chilly at night, it can be a little cold, especially if you don't have a jacket, a sleeping bag, some thick clothing. So it is kind of an odd choice, but I didn't think it was too weird because I'm putting myself in his shoes, and this is someone that he likes, but he doesn't know super well. They're kind of getting to know each other, and you may not want to go back to this person's place and sleep there knowing that she possibly just ditched you for some other guy. What if like they returned home and you were still there? Would it be awkward?
Yeah.
I don't think it's that suspicious. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Now that you went over it again, I just thought, or this thought just came to me. Well, maybe he did bring a blanket or something. Maybe he was staying at her place, but she didn't have like extra blankets. Like, who knows? Totally could have had blankets in his car. And then if you have that, it's actually not that cold, and they may just not have mentioned it. I think if you take something like that into consideration, then it doesn't seem as crazy anymore. But yeah, without a blanket in that weather, being out in your car, and you can't obviously just leave it running all the time for the heat. Yeah, I think I'd just get so cold and uncomfortable that I'd go in taking the risk of, feeling uncomfortable inside. I think that, but it's just also a personal question, I guess. So I understand, I get where you're coming from with this too.
Well, regardless, he would, stay in the car overnight. And in the morning, there's still no sign of Amy. So he returns her backpack and Amy's purse to the apartment. He says he took a shower and then he left. But he also, before he left, he says he left a note. And according to his sister, this was not exactly a nice note. It was kind of one of those things like, where did you go? I lost you. What happened to you? Sort of thing, because obviously he can't really call her, get in contact with her anyway. He has her stuff, so he leaves this note to kind of be like, what the heck happened? Where'd you go? Which to investigators could seem a little suspicious, especially with the tone being not very nice. But my thought when I was watching the episode was, if he was responsible for her disappearance in any way, would you just leave a note for someone when you know what happened to them? Like, there's two ways to think about it. You could be setting up an alibi to say, look, obviously I didn't, she left me because I left this note wondering where she went. Or it could be very honest and just curious what happened to her. I think we've heard a lot of cases where someone stops communicating with the person that they have harmed or done something to because it wouldn't make sense for them to try to call that person or reach out when they know that that person's not reaching back out to them. What do you think?
Well, we've heard of those cases, but I definitely remember cases where they have done this on purpose. They like text them to their phone. They already know they're dead. Like, they're setting up an alibi. They're doing all these things. So yeah, I kind of like how you watched the episode and definitely kind of, it took you the other route. And I was the whole time like, well, he looks so suspicious. Like, yeah, he's giving a narrative. He's setting up his alibi. He's doing everything that to me was just like red flag after red flag. Yeah.
I think that shows you like the challenge investigators have in these cases, because you could totally see things one way and then you could totally see things another. And the challenge being too, you don't really have a lot of like physical evidence. It's all, as you can see, circumstantial. It depends on how you look at it and the circumstances of the situation. So regardless, no one heard from Amy all day Sunday, the day after her day with Eric. By Monday morning, her parents became concerned, obviously. They had called her phone and they asked people that they knew from the old port about what was going on. According to Amy's sister, they immediately knew something was wrong because she wouldn't have left her cat alone in the apartment without telling someone that she was going away. Obviously, you need to be there for the cat and feed it and take care of it. So that's setting off alarm bells for the family. And more alarm bells when Amy doesn't show up to work. She had to prepare for a presentation and eventually give a presentation. So it was very unlike Amy not to be diligent with her job. When she was missing for nearly 2 days, her family and friends started distributing missing persons flyers all over Portland. And that same night, Amy's mother called the county sheriff's office to report Amy officially missing. And the sheriff called Detective Young from the Portland Police Department to start investigating. What do you think about the gap there between not hearing from Amy and then calling police after you've already started putting up missing persons posters? To me, it seems like you would probably call the police sooner and then start putting up posters.
It's kind of hard to say. I wonder if they knew that they had to wait a certain amount of hours before you can report them missing because she was an adult and all of that and the circumstances. Just knowing she went out with this guy, if you tell police that, maybe if she hasn't been gone long enough, they just assume they're going to be like, well, she'll show up. You don't have enough reason to be this worried yet. So I think maybe just her not showing up to work really is what it took them, or it could just be, well, now it's been 48 hours or whatever. Either of those things to me explain why they waited until Monday. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation. I think they're just being cautious, but like you said, she's an adult, or maybe she got tied up with something and wasn't able to get to her phone. But I think that the real concern started when she did miss work, and that was very unlike her.
So once her family reports her missing to police, they do get on her case. And in order to better understand her behavior, on the night she disappeared, detectives search Amy's apartment. They took any answering machines, computers, phones, diaries, anything that would give them some insight on who she was talking to. No one they talked to about Amy would suspect that she'd just leave with someone and not come home. Police was very interested in finding Eric, of course, because he was the last person they knew Amy was with, and they talked to the rental car service and quickly located his rental car, and a patrol car waited by it for his return. So Monday, October 22nd, in downtown Portland, around 10:30 p.m., Eric returned to his car, and he wanted to know why they were at his vehicle. Said that he was on his way to the police department to report his friend missing. So my first thought here is like, well, how convenient is this? Of course he would say that. What do you think?
Yeah, so this was actually the first point in the episode where I started to be a little more suspicious of Eric, for sure. It was just weird to me the way that it's at night, he's at this gas station. They would later on observe that he had been drinking too. So it was all of these things were kind of setting off more alarm bells for me when I was just thinking this is suspicious. This is something is off here with this guy.
And also, what were we thinking? Why is Eric still in Portland? Did we know how long he was planning to stay? Why didn't he return home when Amy ditched him? Yeah, I wonder if this was just his vacation and he wanted to make the most out of it, even though she was missing. Well, I don't know. Did you have any specific thoughts on this?
Yeah, I thought the same thing, because I had assumed that he would have just gone back to Florida after Amy ditched him. I couldn't think of much of a real reason to stick around after that, because he came there, as far as we know, specifically for her. But I think it is possible, like you said, perhaps he had taken some time off of work and, still wanted to enjoy some bit of a vacation, which is a very reasonable explanation. It is just weird, though, that they found him at this gas station at 10:30 at night. And I that part definitely was suspicious to me.
Yeah, and like you said, they observed that he had been drinking, and so they do ask him to go with them to the Portland Police Department, and at the station, they questioned him on his activities Saturday night. He was very detailed and gave them a lot of material that they checked out later. He said, quote, Amy wanted to know if I wanted to go to this dance club so she could go dancing with these guys. Sure, whatever, it's fine. That's what happened, and then we lost each other. So at this point, another thought that popped to my head is Amy went to another club just to see these guys. I don't know. It's just, yeah. I mean, I guess that could happen, but I just feel like, yeah. What do you think?
It seems like another situation where he is just kind of going along with what Amy wants to do again, which is, perhaps contributing to the jealousy angle here, stirring up some negative feelings about, not only is she not really paying attention to me, but she's literally perhaps following these other guys to another club
Yeah.
where I'm probably not going to be included in the activities.
I'm thinking, like, even if you're just going out with a friend, it wouldn't be the nicest thing to, like, focus so much on someone else and kind of leave them to themselves. I don't know if there was, like, not an altercation, but, just some form of she kind of got annoyed with him because he wanted more and she didn't. Like, we don't, I guess, know if that happened, but I just try to imagine myself, like, a friend visiting me, even if I have no romantic interest in that person. Would I really, like, leave them alone? I would probably want to make the most of our time together and have, like, a good time. So, yeah. I mean, again, when
I
I
agree.
watched the episode, I thought, well, Eric is, like, super suspicious. So I didn't even know these guys, if they exist or not. And I was like, anything he said, I'm kind of questioning and thinking, do they exist? Like, is this the reason? Is this what happened? She seems like such a nice guy. Would she really do this? I'm just overall, like, questioning anything he does or says.
Yeah, and we just don't have a lot of answers other than what he claims.
So, yeah, again, another claim. He claimed that after he lost Amy, he stopped for gas and then got on the main turnpike back to her apartment. At the toll booth, he then realized that he only had 15 cents left in his pocket, and the toll taker let him pass without paying the toll. He recounted that the next 12 hours that follows, his story made some detectives suspicious. He had her identification, he had her pocketbook, he had her code, he ended up not sleeping in the house, but later in the morning took a shower there. And to police, it's indicative of so-called post-offense behavior. There was a lot of alerts going off about this guy, and Detective Harkless found it suspicious that he told them he didn't go into the residence that night. Did something bad happen there? Or was he trying to distance himself from whatever potentially bad happened there? So detectives decide that they cannot rule Eric out as a suspect. And as we kind of know at this point, I thought he was very suspicious, but I think we should talk about that a little more. I know you have some other thoughts on that. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, at this point, I think, detectives are doing all the right things. Eric is still a pretty good suspect. He's potentially the last person to really have an account of what Amy was up to that night. Personally, I just think that they kind of did some heavy interpretation into Eric, which is fine, but it's just that it's interpretation. They're kind of looking at his activities and being like, oh, well, he, didn't want to go inside the house. Is that because something bad happened there? To me, I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. It doesn't have to mean that something bad happened in there, like we talked about. And to me, it also seems like he's being forthcoming with information. It's not like he's being withholding about what happened. Obviously, they can't tell whether he's telling the truth, but I think it was already a good sign for me the way he was cooperating. He went right down to the station and was talking to them and giving his a detailed account of what happened, even if it made police suspicious.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the things, like you said, you could see at it from two angles or two sides to it, as the side where you even started at the bar, like he's just kind of watching, like could he get jealous, could he get mad, but also could he just be the nice guy tagging along. Later on, like he loses her at the club and goes to look for her, but then you could also think like, well, shouldn't he have waited in the car for her? Why doesn't he go inside? Is it out of respect? Is it suspicious because something happened there? With all these things, yeah, I can think just you turn it the other side and you see the other sides is just really, I think just knowing at this point he's the last person to have seen her, that they can confirm, that's the major thing probably that makes him a good suspect at this point. Police also just seem to really be moving very rapidly on this case. I know with so many cases, they're really taking their time and maybe not putting as much effort towards solving the case right away from the get-go. And that's something we don't see a lot, or at least it appears that way. And I really like that in this case. It just seemed like they were really good about everything. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I was even surprised that they had the wherewithal to find and track down his rental car using like that OnStar system in the car and stake out the gas station. Like, that's some real detective work here. They didn't, just wait until they could like find a cell phone number and call him or something. They're like, no, we're going to find this guy as fast as we can while he's still in Portland, even though he doesn't even live here. So they're definitely moving really quick. And it's while they're talking to Eric, though, that there will be some more information revealed to them in this case. 3 young men will claim that they have information about Amy's disappearance. They were at a bar on Monday night, so 2 days after her day with Eric, and they saw a picture on a flyer, and they flagged down a police car and went to the station to talk to police after recognizing Amy. They told police they were with her on the night of her disappearance and that their friend, Jeffrey Russ Gorman, is the one who gave her a ride. Now, Jeff is the man who Eric told police paid the most attention to Amy. And that's already a big clue because now police are able to corroborate some of what Eric was telling police. Here is this guy who he was talking about, and sure enough, the friends are saying, yeah, that's true. Jeff did volunteer to be interviewed by investigators. He told police that he gave her a ride because she couldn't find Eric and that he had her keys when they left the establishment. He invited Amy then to an after-hours party at their apartment. We're told, or he says, that Amy got uncomfortable with just him and his roommate. That after-hours party that he had advertised did not exactly pan out, so she asked for a ride back into town, and he says that he dropped her off at the pavilion, which is where he had taken her from earlier that night. And this is already kind of weird because why would he take her back to the pavilion, a place where we understand is now closed, and not only closed, but a place where her ride and her stuff with Eric was not when they left. He wasn't there, apparently. So why would he drop her off here? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Can you find any reasoning?
Yeah, I wonder if they left without checking, if he was still there, and she didn't know exactly when the club closes. If you assume that, I could kind of see her wanting to go back and like find out. But still, I guess, I mean, maybe she asked him to, well, like, will you look around with me? Like, will you stay around? But if I don't make that assumption, just being dropped off at a club that's potentially closed, where you don't know if your ride is still there in the middle of the night by yourself as a woman, I wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I think it just depends on some more information on that. Like, how much did she really know? Did they try to find him before they left? Did they know he wasn't there anymore? All those things factor in.
Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah.
According to Jeff, Amy went back into the club, which is already a little suspicious because we know that the club closed at around 1 a.m. when they were having last call, so we don't really understand how she would have gone back into the club.
Unless you assume they left way earlier, way sooner.
And right, which
then doesn't make sense with what Eric said, but yeah, which is it? It cannot
Something's
be both.
not lining up.
Yeah.
Jeff says that he went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and that was, the last time that he had saw Amy is when he dropped her off. During the interview, though, investigators are struck by his casual confidence. He seems a little cocky when he's telling his story, too confident, and they didn't have a good feeling about him. But Jeff also has a roommate, and his roommate is able to corroborate his story. He says that he saw Amy and Jeff leave the apartment together, and he waited on the couch, was watching TV, and expecting that Jeff would be back in 15 or 20 minutes. Now, investigators do a little digging, and they also see that Eric has a criminal record in the state of Missouri, including a conviction for assault with physical injury. Now, this is Eric, not Jeff, so they're looking into both of these guys and their backgrounds. investigators at this point are believing that Amy was the victim of a crime. Still not a lot of answers on exactly what happened to her, but it becomes apparent at this point that something has happened to her and she's probably not coming back. Or if she is, maybe she's being held somewhere against her will and they need to find her. This is also a very personal case for the police investigating. One of the detectives has a young daughter who, her name is also Amy, and she's the same age. And occasionally she went to some of the same places that Amy went in Portland. So investigators are kind of forming a special bond with Amy in this case. And her mother felt amazed that people didn't even know Amy, but were still able to understand who she was as a person. And this is a really big part of the case because so many people can connect with Amy on a personal level and want answers. And even the detectives are putting in overtime. You know, they're working 16-hour days, interviewing, re-interviewing witnesses, conducting searches, following up on every lead and tip that they get. Amy's sister said that investigators were truly working night and day. And so the family would bring them breakfast, lunch, dinner, all these meals, and stop by the station to help them however they could because they knew they were working so hard and just wanted to support them in their efforts to find Amy.
And then on Wednesday morning, there is a break in the investigation. Investigators recovered a time-stamped security camera video, and this shows Eric bought gas at 1:36 a.m., verifying his alibi. Every little detail of what he told investigators about his trip to the gas station was true. The toll taker doesn't describe him as someone who was in cold sweat. Quote, the cat that just ate the canary. He seemed like a confused tourist and was just trying to get home. So at this point, with this information coming in, they feel comfortable and clear Eric. We get a lot more information on Jeff's background. Jeff was from Alabama, and his records show that violence had followed him throughout his past. Him and his mother had a bad relationship. She called the cops on him numerous times. At age 15, he attacked his mother after he broke into his neighbor's house, and he has an extensive criminal history. According to Detective Young, you don't have to look far to find out that he's trouble. According to police, he is very focused and aggressive towards women. And even his friends say that he was very focused, like every night he wanted to go out and pick up a different girl. Detectives say that women who were involved with Jeff believe they had non-consensual sex with him. Charges were never filed because the women felt ashamed or at fault. In another interview with Jeff's roommates, they didn't remember him returning after 15 minutes. So we earlier had the statement from his roommate, which was like, I expected him to be back in 15 to 20 minutes, but then it turns out they never really, that was just something they expected, but they never really noticed him coming back at that point. They actually didn't remember him returning home at all. Kush changed his earlier story, or depending on how you interpret what he said earlier. So at this point, Jeff does not have an alibi. One roommate remembered coming home from a late night breakfast with friends when he saw Jeff in the bathroom cleaning up, fully dressed at 4 a.m., and this does not add up with what Jeff told investigators. Jeff changed his appearance, he shaved his head, he got tattoos and body piercings, and his anxiety level apparently is up. When questioned about the change in appearance, he says, quote, why the change in the appearance? Just a new look. I usually shave my head. And when asked if he shaved his head since he had been in Maine, he said no. According to Young, possible reasons for a change in appearance can be to throw people off, but it can also be to avoid being looked at as he was, as the Jeffrey Gorman he was. He didn't give police permission to search his car, which could also be an indicator that possibly something happened in his car. A few days later, detectives heard from one of Jeff's friends that he detailed his car from bumper to bumper, washed the inside and washed everything down, carpets, seats, everything. Why would he do that if not to get rid of evidence is something that came to my mind. Thoughts at this point were, what do we think happened to Amy?
Well, I think that Jeff is very suspicious at this point. We already know that they have all but cleared Eric. His story is lining up with what he said, even though they were doubting it in the beginning. Now they're kind of like, well, he checks out. And now here we have another guy whose story really is not checking out. I mean, you have all the questionable hallmarks are here. A story that's not adding up, a guy who is changing his appearance, is clearly going through something right now that is causing him to make big life changes. So if I'm a detective, I think we have hit on something very crucial here.
Yeah, I think a lot changed since we last discussed if we think Eric makes for a good suspect. At that point, we didn't know if those other guys even existed. Like, we didn't know if she'd been with them. And now that they came forward and Eric's alibi has been confirmed, and we know that Jeff doesn't have an alibi, there's a lot of conflicting information about what really happened that night. He's doing suspicious things like changing his appearance, and not just a little bit, but a lot, actually. We know all about his background, and that sounds like he's trouble. Like, the police even said that. And we know now that he didn't give them permission to, search his car, and then he really goes and cleans it. That just, all of that, makes him the number one suspect, and I do agree, just makes sense to clear Eric at this point.
A week after her disappearance now, her story is front page news all over Maine. Everyone is talking about it. Police believe that Amy is almost certainly dead at this point. It's still possible that she was being held somewhere against her will, but just not likely. So police have an informant call Jeff, and this informant tells him matter-of-factly that police found Amy. They found her body. And the hope here was that he would go and check out what they allegedly found, and they put a tracking device on his car, hoping that he would lead them right to Amy's body, but the plan does not work. He just goes home. On November 17th, they release a statement to the public that points the finger directly at Jeff. This is what police do to use the press to their advantage in this case. The story makes front page news the next morning, and it, for all intents and purposes, seems to work. Life in Portland changes for Jeff. His friends told the police that he started to drink heavily and use more drugs, and just before Thanksgiving, he would leave to head back home to his hometown of Troy, Alabama. In early December, detectives get a break from a source that they were not anticipating. On Sunday morning of that weekend, at 3:14 in the morning, they find out that he was actually pulled over by police in the city of Westbrook for a headlight violation. So now they know for sure that he lied about having been in bed after 2 a.m. So this is all starting to line up. The roommate saying we actually don't remember him coming home, and now we have evidence of him being out at 3:14 in the morning, and his story is not adding up. We also know that 2 days after Amy disappeared, he borrowed a shovel from his mother's boyfriend. So 6 weeks after Amy's disappearance, the state police get a call from the Maine Warden Service, who handles searches, and they want to help find Amy. So on December 8th, they put a massive search plan together and into action. Searchers go to 19 sites with their cadaver dogs and teams of searchers. They are searching for a body that is buried, obviously, in the woods, which is very difficult. At around 1 p.m, a group began to search an old, abandoned, and overgrown access road that is relatively close to Jeff's mother's house. The road leads to a pond, which investigators knew that Jeff fished at. About an hour and a half later, a member of the search team steps on a patch of loose earth, and they bring a cadaver dog over, and the dog quickly hits on a scent. So Detective Young, he carefully digs a small test hole and finds something soft. It turns out to be the edge of a gray sweatshirt. At this point, the missing persons case officially turns into a homicide case because they have found a body. When I was watching Disappeared, the episode, I was wondering, how did they know exactly where to search? It seems like this is what they were kind of hoping to do by putting a tracker on his car to take them to an area to search, but that plan didn't work out. So I was not sure how they knew where to hone in on. Obviously, they searched 19 different sites, so it wasn't exactly the location, but the fact that they were able to locate her body within one day of the search being initiated is pretty remarkable.
I wonder if this is just because this place is so close to where his mom lived at the time. And since it was one of those 19 spots, I could just see how it became one of those 19 spots, and they were going to go all about them. And maybe it was just lucky that what came first in order, or like was among the first to search. Yeah. And I think overall in this case, we see very good investigators' work, and that's just it just continues,
Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable to think that they didn't even rely on the dogs to take them there. They were so thorough with this search that they were just walking on Earth and noticed that something was a little loose. So a lot of great work on this case.
So we know that exactly 6 weeks and 6 days after Amy disappeared, her body was found, and it was confirmed that she was murdered. The hardest part for Amy's sister was to go into her apartment and pack her things up, knowing that she wouldn't be back. Everything was exactly like she left it, and Amy's smell was still there. The autopsy results showed that the autopsy results were horrific, and the results didn't surprise investigators. Amy had suffered a gunshot wound. She also had extensive damage to her face and head. She'd been struck or beaten, if you will. Her underwear was down at her ankles, indicating that a sexual assault had occurred or was in process at the time that she was killed. A lot of the evidence had wasted away and was not able to be sampled. No DNA evidence linking Jeff to Amy's death could ever be found. All evidence linked to him in this case was still circumstantial. On December 9th, the same day as her autopsy, Jeff got a call from his mother. She told him that they had found Amy's body, and in that conversation, he told his mother that he shot Amy in the head. Jeff told his mother that they had been out on a date and they had gone to his fishing spot where they were walking around the lake, and she had said something that he didn't like, and Jeff had hit her and shot Amy with a handgun. His mother repeats her son's murder confession to a friend, who in turn called police. And then on December 11th, Jeff actually points a gun at a man outside a sandwich shop, claiming he was staring at him. The man reported the incident to the local police. The Troy, Alabama police are in a standoff with Jeff for 6 hours, during which he points 2 guns at his head. And after Jeff surrendered, he is extradited back to Maine after this incident. In 2002, his mother gave a full account of his confession.
Yes, this confession comes during grand jury proceedings where they are trying to decide whether they can now charge Jeff with Amy's murder. And a big reason that they can is because of that account from his mother. So the trial begins on January 14th of 2003 at the Cumberland County Courthouse in Portland. The case hinges on the mother's testimony here. When she was called as a witness, though, she says she can't remember what she said in the grand jury proceedings or remember anything else from that day. So this obviously complicates the situation. So much of their case is relying on Jeff's mother, relaying his confession to the jury, but she won't do it. So what they actually end up doing is playing the recording of the confession from the grand jury testimony. They play that for the jury, and that pretty much does the trick. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and the judge sentenced Jeff to 60 years in prison, meaning his earliest release date is 2055. Now, Alina, I did a little bit of research after the disappeared episode was released to get some more information about this sentencing. According to the Current and the American Journal, the judge in the case concluded that the evidence did not support the allegations that Gorman sexually assaulted Amy, nor that the killing was premeditated. And so this factored into why he did not receive a full life sentence, but obviously did get 60 years in prison. So I think we should talk about your thoughts on this episode as you were watching it in real time and how your opinion of Eric really changed throughout this whole episode.
I think as everybody can tell who's listened to our episode so far, in the beginning, I just totally thought it's Eric. It's solved after watching the episode for 7 minutes. I was like, well, I know what happened. Eric is the guy. And it just goes to show that you should never be so quick to jump to conclusions. And this is what I guess sometimes happens in other cases with investigators, or it just happens so quickly. And it happened to me because it all seemed so convenient. He was right there. He was giving me all these red flags, and I just took it and was like, well, we have him, case solved. And then the second half of the episode, I watched it and I was like, well, I'm stupid. I'm all wrong. But I know you didn't have the same feelings watching the episode. So I thought that was very interesting how you watched the same thing, but really developed other thoughts, Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, you can see how investigators develop what we talk about, and they talk about as the tunnel vision, because you have the suspect that you want it to be because it makes sense. But with this episode, it really illustrates how our minds kind of put the pieces together for us and maybe don't look at some of the other explanations that there also could be. I think for me, the turning point did come when police found him at the gas station after he'd been drinking and said, oh yeah, I was just about to report her missing. That's when I was really starting to view him in a more suspicious light. But that kind of changed again after he, voluntarily went with police to give his story and gave the detailed account of everything that he and Amy did that night and what he did after Amy disappeared. And then my original thoughts about him just kind of being this nice guy character seemed to be vindicated in some ways.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that the police did an effective job investigating this case?
As I was watching the episode, I was just like, I love the police work we're seeing. We see this, I don't want to be mean, but rather rarely, at least to this extent. They did everything. They went way far and beyond. And yeah, I love that part of it. I mean, it's still so sad for the family, but at least they got their closure and they could trust the police all the way. And they had an ally, a strong ally in finding their daughter. And we often see cases where that's not always the case. There can be disagreements between the family and the police. There can be lawsuits over getting insights into the case and the files and all of that. So with all of that, I was in love with the police work in this case. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they did an amazing job. I think it also illustrates, there's kind of a message you hear from police where it's we treat every case with the same, level of determination and importance and all that. But I think it's just hard not to think that this was a really personal case for police. I mean, they even talked about how they saw their own children in this girl. And I think that kind of elevated things for them. I mean, this was really a personal mission and not just a job to them anymore to help find out what happened to Amy. I think it's unfortunate we don't see that for every case. I mean, I'm thinking that there are disappearances where maybe investigators can't relate to the person that they are supposed to be getting justice for, which is really unfortunate. But in this case, it worked out really well because they were so driven to reach a resolution. And the family needs some credit too, because they really pushed this just as hard. They were out there putting up missing persons posters the same day that they were letting police know what was going on. They were doing the legwork. They were, encouraging the police to do work. They were feeding them, making sure they had the energy to keep going. I think you just see, and the community was invested in this. This is a smaller town, so you have a lot of press coverage. And I think all of those things added up, and everyone was firing on all cylinders to get some sort of answer for this girl, and it worked.
Thank you for listening. We'll hope you tune in next time. Good night.